We're a little bit late into the evening this afternoon. As the hour is upon us, will the secretary please call the roll?
Directors Huang.
Here.
Akbari.
Here.
Sethy.
Here.
Weed.
Here.
And Gunther.
Here. Mr. Peterson, will you lead us in a simpler flag this evening before we lose you?
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That last pound of flesh out of it. All right. Public comments, I believe. Difficulty with my machine this evening. Yes, welcome for public comments. Is he there? No? No public comments? All right, moving on. Consent calendar. Is there anything the board would like to add to the consent calendar?
I will make the motion to add items 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and 5.4 to the consent calendar, please.
I will second. Motion is second. Secretary, call the roll, please.
Directors Huang.
Aye.
Akbari.
Aye.
Sethy.
Aye.
Weed.
Aye.
And Gunther.
Aye. Moving on.
I will make the motion to adopt the consent calendar as amended, please.
Seconded. Second, a motion and a second.
Directors Huang.
Aye.
Akbari.
Aye.
Sethy.
Aye.
Weed.
Aye.
And Gunther.
Aye. Thank you for the motion.
Item 5.5.
We move on to item 5.5.
Thank you, President Gunther. Item 5.5 is a resolution honoring Larry Stephen Peterson upon his retirement from district service. Steve will be retiring from the district on May 2nd, today, after over 32 years of service. So Steve joined the Alameda County Water District as an assistant engineer in the engineering department on December 15th, 1986. After serving as the resident engineer on the Vineyard Heights Tank and Alameda Creek pipeline projects, as well as being the project engineer on the original Rubber Dam No. 3 project, Steve was promoted to associate engineer on August 15th, 1989. And in reviewing Steve's personnel file in preparation for this evening's meeting, I came across this quote that I included in your board packet, and I thought it was very applicable to Steve and one of our older division managers, a gentleman named Bill Blair, who was responsible for the project engineering group in engineering, I think pegged Steve pretty well earlier in his ACWD career, so I want to share what he said, and this is a quote. Peterson has done an outstanding job, he called everybody by their last names, in making the construction of Rubber Dam No. 3 a reality in 1989. Peterson has good technical skills and a varied experience background. However, the success of the project is due in large part to personnel factors. Peterson has a clear view of what needs to be done, does first things first, is a problem solver with lots of initiative. He thinks through his approach when dealing with other agencies and understands political realities. He consistently uses good judgment, engineering and other, and uses tact when dealing with others. So, after successfully managing the multi-year construction of Water Treatment Plant No. 2, Steve was promoted to the project engineering supervisor position on December 20th, 1993. And then in 2001, he was promoted to project engineering manager. In his roles as project engineering supervisor and manager, Steve implemented many of the work processes, guidelines, tools, and practices that the district still uses today to manage the capital improvement program. Over the years, Steve has been instrumental in both leading and helping others successfully complete numerous major capital projects within engineering and assisting operations. In 2007, Steve transferred to the operations department and assumed the water production manager position and was responsible for ensuring the district meets its water production needs. In 2009, Steve assumed his current role as manager of the operations and maintenance department and its 117 full-time employees. While In the operations department, Steve became the district's representative to the state water contractors and other related organizations. And Steve served as the district's chief water distribution operator as he holds a grade 5 certificate. During his tenure, Steve implemented many improvements in the operations department as well. Steve is originally from Washington State, went to the University of Washington, and had rich construction background with the Guy F. Atkinson Company for about 10 years before joining ACWD, and he put that experience to good use with us. Throughout his career, Steve has demonstrated a phenomenal work ethic and has always strived to continue and grow and improve. Steve has leveraged his considerable experience and expertise in design, construction, and later operations and maintenance to assist ACWD to be well positioned to serve the community. And he will be greatly missed by his many friends at the district and in the California water community as a whole. So staff's recommendation is by motion adopt a resolution honoring Larry Stephen Peterson and expressing appreciation for his 32 years of service with the district. And that's all I have to say about that.
Board comments? Sure.
Well,
We'll give Steve the last laugh. So,
I think the name within the organization is SP. And so, yes, it gives you a degree of confidentiality. But Steve, thank you for many, many years of service. And an Air Force funded program that you learned how to engineering, which is I'll help take credit for, and but extraordinary services within for the district. Remember the story in Rubber Dam number 3, where an impertinent engineer decided that they needed to leave space for a fish ladder, and over the objections insisted that it go in, and it saved us a lot of time and money later on. But one project like that after another in your history. So thank you, and I wish you well in your retirement.
Steve, I was reflecting on some history today as I was thinking about your retirement. So the modern water district really got off the ground around 1950 with Matt Whitfield as general manager. And the 3 cities were formed in the mid-1950s. So if you think about it, and all the contributions you've made, you've really served the community for half the existence of our 3 cities, and most of the latter half of the modern-day water district. And when you read through all of your accomplishments, they are very significant, especially the rubber dam projects, and I think most especially water treatment plant number 2. So I'm not going to forget the many field trips we've been on, the education that you provided me here at the district, both before and after coming on the board. And I'm going to miss you tremendously. In fact, I've always considered us friends, Arlette too. And I'm glad you never told me you went to the University of Washington until I read it today, because University of Washington Huskies are the nemesis of the Cal Bears. But I'm wishing you well, and I hope we see you around.
Hi, Steve. You have been around at the district for nearly 30% of the district's existence, and have had your hand in huge project after huge project, and I think that's something that the community will remember you for, and I hope you'll continue to keep a presence here and keep an eye on us. But on a personal note, I've really appreciated getting to know you over the past 2.5 years, and the education that you've given me, and serving on committee with you was a really fantastic time for me. It was educational, but also very fun as well, and you always made sure that I was up to date on the latest projects, and so I owe you a deep debt of gratitude, but I really, I'm going to miss having your presence here, but I really wish you well for retirement.
Okay, I'll be serious for a bit. First, thank you for serving this district so well with all your accomplishments, both in engineering and operations. I am still not quite sure how I feel about having a grade 5 certificate walking out the door, but I will come to terms with that in a bit. But on the personal side, I really appreciate all the conversations that we have, all the explanations, recommendations, and guidance that you gave me throughout my career here at Alameda County Water District. That's really appreciated. And on the fun side, I attended many committee meetings with you, and there's always, after your staff present, there is always a Steve Peterson, let me clarify. And after that sentence, there's always the most interesting facts that comes out. I actually really appreciate that, but once in a while I'm like, where's the let me clarify? There has to be something I want to know about the subject. So that is actually a lot of fun for me personally. Also, actually, Arlette, thank you for all the great conversations and lending him to us on all the late nights. I believe he was with us till past midnight one evening for board meeting.
More than one.
More than one. Okay, more than one past midnight. That dedication is really appreciated, both from you and from your family. Although, another fun fact that I just learned today, apparently I missed a lot of great cocktail parties with you. Something about fondness of cocktail hours? Dang. All I'm going to say is, come back and visit us. We will see you around. And we'll have cocktails together at some point soon, hopefully. And on the second part of your life, the fun part, I heard you're going to go explore the world and travel a lot. Have fun, safe journeys. Thank you for serving our customers so well. And we'll miss you. Just come visit us, both of you. Thank you.
I get the last say here. I squeezed a couple minutes out of you too, starting the meeting a little bit late. Thanks, Steve. You know, I was looking at this. Time just moves on and on. And it was like yesterday. I remember you were taking over operations. I was a big advocate of that. I kind of did sort of similar things in the Coast Guard. And I'm looking here at the 1989 date, and I'm thinking, geez, I was in Washington, D.C. at that time trying to figure out how to put a Harpoon missile and a close-in weapon system on a Coast Guard cutter. That's how long back that date is on that time frame that was written. Congratulations. I hate seeing people retire, and yet I love it. Arlette, I'm going to miss you. I'm going to miss both of you. But it really makes me happy to see somebody walk out and be ready to enjoy it. Please do. Safe travels. I know you know how to do it. I know you already did it. But please, come back. See us again. Belinda's going to miss you. I'll miss you. It's been a great time. I've been here. You've been here the whole time I've been here. So there's a few left. Bob's one. That's about it. So maybe Ed. So anyway, thank you so much for your time and service. And with that, we have a plaque, but do you want to come up first, or should we?
I would suggest, why don't you let Steve address the board if he would like to, and then we'll do the plaque, and it'll be a nice photo op.
To make sure I have the right one, because I had one earlier today. I thought about winging it, but it'll help with my composure if I read. So first of all, I want to thank Mr. Shaver for the very kind words that he just shared with you, with the staff report, and with the kind words this afternoon. I was touched by the poem you read to the retirement celebration, and my wife Arlette enjoyed it as well, so thank you.
You're welcome.
And I want to thank each and every one of you, the board, of your appreciation, your recognition of me tonight, and of the support that you've given me over my entire career. And I don't say that lightly. And I had a situation once where someone was a department head approached me and said, "What do you do regarding the board? The board really trusts you." And that stuck with me. And I said, "Well, I don't know what I do, but if somebody else observes I have that kind of relationship with you, that's a big deal to me." And so I cherish that relationship. So, and of course, I want to recognize my wife, Arlette, who's with me here tonight. At my retirement celebration this afternoon, I explained if it wasn't for her motivation in seeking a better work-life balance for me, I wouldn't be here in front of you tonight. So, thank you. Now, it's blurry. Sorry. The district is significantly different and much better for it, in my opinion, than when I started my career in 1986. It's a stronger organization and more capable than ever before of meeting its mission statement of providing high-quality water at a reasonable price to its customers. But change and progress doesn't always come easy, and it takes a lot of work. While I was cleaning out my office this past week, I frequently came across documents that reminded me about all of the accomplishments and the people that made those accomplishments possible. We think we're busy today, but we were also busy at around the turn of the century. I say this because as I was about to throw out an old capital improvement program spreadsheet, had lots of them, I looked at the activities or projects that were simultaneously underway, and it was just a random year, in fiscal year 2003-04 that I was responsible for when I was working in the engineering department as the project engineering manager. So I thought, for grins, I would just share this with you. This is all in one fiscal year. The activities included the design and construction of 4 production facilities. The design of the PT Wellfield Demineralization Facility, construction of the first phase of the Newark Desalination Facility that included 4 production wells, the desal plant itself, and a network of pipelines between the supply wells and the plant itself. Construction of the Mission San Jose ultrafiltration membrane plant conversion project, and the design of the water treatment plant to liquid oxygen conversion project to upgrade the ozone system. That's not all. 3 other significant projects were also underway simultaneously. Construction of a 24-inch pipeline on Overacker to connect the new San Francisco 20-inch takeoff on Paseo Padre with the blending facility, and the design of a new water quality laboratory at headquarters, and the construction of the canopy structure at headquarters to accommodate the district's first photovoltaic installation. As mentioned by Bob in the staff report, I moved to operations in 2007. And as far as events or challenges go, it's hard to top conditions and the stress we were under in the drought of 2014. Operations worked closely with water resources, to determine we needed to conserve our state water project supplies, which initially only consisted of carryover water from the previous year, for use in the summertime since the state allocation was 0. Later in the year, DWR increased the allocation to 5%, a whopping 5%, to allow some movement or the transfer of water to take place in the California aqueduct. Yes, it was a difficult time, and staff worked continuously behind the scene establishing or strengthening relationships and trust to convince the Metropolitan Water Agency to take 10,000 acre-feet of water of semi-tropic pump back so we could take 10,000 acre-feet of Table A allocation. We succeeded. Metropolitan didn't want to take the water. They were taking Colorado River water. And it was disturbing their water management activities. Because once they take the water, they have to pay for it even though they don't want it. And so, Evan Buckland, he actually drove. Sarah Mata and myself, we drove to Bakersfield and at a 3-way meeting with the general manager and his engineer in Semi-Tropic, Steve Awakawa, Mr. Safely, and it slips my mind, from Metropolitan Water District. We talked, explained how desperate we were, and it was only out of that relationship that they said, okay, we'll work with you, we'll work with DWR to make that transfer possible. Then there were the weekly calls to the Assistant General Manager of the East Bay Regional Park District on the district use, as well as 2 other South Bay aqueduct contractors, of water in Lake Del Valle to blend with state water project water that was predicted to be too salty to meet drinking water regulations. ACWD in Zone 7 together emphasized and finally convinced DWR to construct a salinity barrier in the delta to maintain a level of source water quality that we could treat at our treatment plants. Yes, there were a lot of challenges, but we met them head on and we succeeded. Lastly, I want to mention that I feel I'm leaving you with a top-notch operations and maintenance department. The structure is finely tuned and efficiently managed. Its staff is highly capable and competent and is ready to meet new challenges that lie ahead. After all, I can't emphasize enough that the district's greatest asset is its employees. And it's the employees that make the district successful and a well-respected organization. And finally, from the bottom of my heart, I will truly miss everyone, and thank you.
Carry out tradition. You have this plaque?
Yeah.
You've seen a lot of these go through. You're getting yours now. Congratulations. It's well received.
Thank you so much.
Should be able to do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So there's one little item of business left on this item?
Yes, although we already gave him the resolution, we still need to make a motion.
I'll move to staff recommendation.
It's true.
I will second.
If
Happy
it's
to-
not approved, he can't retire.
Oh, wait. Can I take back the second?
Remember what it would be.
Directors Huang,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
I
And
actually
Gunther.
wish to abstain. but-
and Gunther.
I
That
gave
would
him
be
the plaque,
normal.
so aye. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
We can take a quick break?
Sure. Quick, what?
Let's take 5 minutes. I think
Okay.
that'd be enough. And we're going to now move up item 6.3.1, excess earthquake, flood, and business interruption insurance.
Okay, thank you, President Gunther. So this evening, staff is planning to make a follow-up presentation regarding the excess insurance options available to the district. And this item follows a discussion that the board had at the March 14th board meeting. An outcome of that discussion was that the board referred the matter to the Finance Committee for additional review. The Finance Committee reviewed the issues at depth with both staff and a representative from ACWD, who is also joining us again this evening on April 16th. And the outcome of the Finance Committee meeting was that the committee members asked staff to share additional information with the full board, which we will plan on doing this evening, but there is no committee recommendation at this time. So with that, I will introduce Jennifer Solito, who will kick us off on this item.
As Bob said, in March, the board considered staff recommendation to transfer providers, insurance providers, for district insurance coverage for workers' compensation, property, and general liability. And that discussion also included the option to purchase additional excess earthquake and flood insurance. And in March, the board did approve staff recommendations to change to ACWD as our insurance provider, starting with fiscal year 1920 coverage for all our standard coverages. So again, workers' comp, property, and general liability. But did not make a decision, as Bob said, on the excess flood and earthquake insurance. And there were several questions that the board asked at that time, which staff has researched and presented to the Finance Committee in April, that we'll recap for the whole board today. And then, as Bob says, there was not a consensus in the Finance Committee, so we're bringing it back to the full board. So Katie Roberts, our Workplace Health and Safety Officer, will present the additional findings and the research into the questions your board had previously. And then we also have Karen Thiesing here from ACWD PIA. She's the Director of Insurance Services, so she'll do a portion of the presentation going like pretty deep dive into what the insurance options are for the district. And over here we also have Debbie, I'm going to say your name wrong, Kybers, who is the Lead Member Services Representative for ACWD PIA as well. So hopefully between this cast we can answer any questions you have. So thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good evening, members of the board and public. And thank you for taking the time to have this discussion again. I know it's very exciting. We get to talk about insurance for at least another 30 minutes. So we're going to go over it's not on. Nope. There we go. All right. We are going to do an overview of those outstanding topics that we discussed in the previous Finance Committee meetings. I'm going to provide some additional FEMA information, answering some of the questions that we had about that. Review the excess coverage details for earthquake, flood, and business interruption and how those differ in their coverage. And then complete the question and answers with any discussion items that you may have. I don't know how it's not working. Oh, there we go.
I'll control it.
Okay. We'll just do one of those. Okay. So as Jennifer said, on March 14th, the board has already authorized the district to join the Association of California Water Agencies Joint Power Insurance Authority, and that was for specifically our workers' compensation, our general and property liability for fiscal year 1920. So that is handled, that has been taken care of, it's approved, it's good, and we are starting that process. But as part of the initial RFP bid that we had sent out, we also requested that Aqua JPIA include the cost proposal for excess coverage for earthquake and flood. The coverage is, again, as to reiterate, it is entirely voluntary. We do not have to make a decision today. It is something for discussion to determine what our needs are as a district and exploring those options. This cost is extremely variable because it depends on the changes that we request. If we want more coverage in some areas than in others, obviously that's going to deeply affect what it is that we would pay, and it also would depend on how much do we want on certain properties versus other properties, whatever assets that we have. However, in general, it is expected to cost us about $240,000 a year to purchase $25 million worth of coverage for excess earthquake and flood coverage combined. So, as a quick reminder, currently the district has a minimal amount of earthquake and flood coverage provided through our standard property program, so what we already have approved and go into. So the way that works is it is shared by the entire pool and is in place to provide everybody with a minimal level of coverage so that in the event that we needed to receive FEMA funding, they would say, you know, do you have insurance on this? And we're all, yep, we sure do. We have this much, all right? And so should a disaster occur, all of the impacted members would divide that $2.5 million of earthquake coverage amongst themselves. So everybody would get some part of that $2.5 million. But once that pool is empty, it's empty for the rest of the year for everybody. So it would be a hope for one only event at all. That was real small. With the flood, the pool coverage is $10 million for properties that are in flood zones A and V, and then all of the other zones, it's $25 million of coverage. Okay, and again, that's the pooled coverage. So the minimal coverage is not enough, obviously, to restore services to the district for our facilities following a disaster, but it is enough to meet the FEMA requirements to have insurance on our properties. And again, it's included in our coverage already. It's no additional cost. So in a previous meeting, we did discuss some of that FEMA stuff and some of that FEMA money and how that works and what part that they play in this process after a disaster. So there's a few things that we do want to keep in mind when we think about FEMA and what money they provide. The main thing is that is not guaranteed to cover all of our costs. They'll cover certain things, which we'll look at in another slide, but that is substantially limited to what you're allowed to use that funding on. It's also not, it can take a while to receive that funding. At some point, it can include repayment requirements, which is kind of an important thing if you're expecting it to just be able to handle an issue. And ultimately, we would still end up being required to have earthquake and flood because, as Director Weed has pointed out, you only get one bite of the apple. So you have to have earthquake and flood coverage on it in the amounts that you received funding for it. And then, you know, the good news is that even if we have the insurance coverage, we still would receive FEMA funding. They're not going to, it doesn't slow down the process. But there are caveats for it and how you're allowed to receive it. So some additional questions came up on that and for that FEMA information in Finance Committee. The clarifiers for what that money is allowed to be used for. FEMA does not cover losses of revenue. They do not cover the cost of financing loans to rebuild, such as our line of credit. They only cover reimbursements for very specific categories that they list out, and that is things like debris removal, emergency protective measures, roads, bridges, water control facilities, public, buildings, that kind of thing. So we would have to limit that. We would have to limit it to just those categories. The insurance would cover this stuff outside of that. At the request of committee, staff has verified that FEMA does not make specific recommendations for public sector insurance coverage based on the broad spectrum of agency size and potential hazards. We discussed earlier, FEMA does not, they don't have a recommendation for it, but they do recommend that public agencies have insurance coverage on their properties and have that at least meet that minimal requirement to receive those funds, which again we meet by having our basic coverage because it does have some earthquake and some flood in it. So some additional questions were raised about at the last board meeting, asking to evaluate a mock earthquake scenario and estimate the damage that may be incurred. Modeling was completed in the past by a consultant, and they estimated the amount of damage due to a specific quake situation. That information is what's currently being used in planning our capital improvement projects and retrofitting and pipe replacement, which Bob can answer those questions about that. But we did check with our emergency preparedness work unit and about updating the updated modeling and modeling of multiple different scenarios, but that hasn't that's not been performed by the district unit, the emergency response unit, so we don't have those exact answers for if it's this specific thing in this specific location. Based off of the study that was conducted and the district participated in that study with Union City and Newark, the district, all of our district facilities scored as high risk and a risk rating of 54, and that was, they calculated that and came up with that number by multiplying the probability, which came out as a 3, by the impact, which came out as 18. And based on the estimate population exposure for the entire planning area, at the time the value of the district's critical assets was $1.4 billion. But it is unknown the value of potential damage, however, given the limited information that we have to date. The other questions that we have, the board asked if there's a possibility that the district would incur little damage and or be outside of the FEMA designated area, and that is, of course, always a possibility. It would depend on the center of the earthquake, the level of magnitude of it happening, and it's possible that we could have little damage or be outside a designated area because there might be greater need closer to the epicenter and we have some minor repairs, and we may not be classified in that area. That would be one of the benefits to having the insurance, is that any impact determined to be caused by the earthquake would be covered. The coverage is better in the difference of condition coverage than the pool, obviously, because it would be a greater amount of money that we would be eligible to receive, because priority funding would go to those that are affected more severely. And regarding other carrier options for excess coverage, obviously this isn't, we can't really look at that because that would require us to go out to another RFP. However, we did research generally what is available in consideration of a new RFP process if the board so directed for that specific coverage. We reached out to many insurance firms and attempted to get coverage quotes in the amount of the $25 million so we can compare and see what's available and see similarly. But many of the insurers use the same underwriters, so several requests were put in and they all use the same ones, so they'd already be blocked, and then I'd get an email like, well, you already have one in, and it's, so, yep, okay. So it's a no, you're not going to give me an answer? Okay. So in those instances, we were very limited in what we were able to get a hold of. So in the next two slides, we're going into tables. We looked at the difference in timing and cost between the various sources of post-disaster recovery funding that is available to the district, and what it would cost to maintain this option if the earthquake were to happen in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years, and that's going to be for each type. In this specific slide on this table, we're looking specifically at the cost to maintain our current line of credit, which would provide us with $10 million and would be available in 2 days, making it the quickest way for us to access money right after that disaster. We need money in our hands. That's the fastest way to get it. It's important to keep in mind that that money can only be accessed in the event of a governor or presidential disaster declaration, so we would need to have that and we need to be in that area. And it would also need to be paid back in a calendar year, or we are going to deal with long-term debt repayment with interest. So that would be expensive. And please note that the model that for this model to work, we're assuming that there would be no increase in costs from year to year, though the actual costs are expected to increase over time. It was the easiest way for us to compare them across the board and without any change. So our next table is looking at the timing and costs if we were to purchase the excess earthquake insurance. And this is again based on the assumption that the $240,426 per year doesn't change, and the district is insured for $25 million of coverage. The actual costs are expected to increase periodically, as expected. The annual costs are higher than the line of credit, but the gain or available funds to us, if we needed it, are much more substantial. And they don't have to be repaid because we've already paid into it because it's our insurance. The speed at which we would receive these funds also is extremely variable and would be dependent on of the claims assessment, when were they able to come out, how substantial is that assessment, when does the report get written and turned in, and then we would be able to have access to the funds. But some funds could be received within a month in a dire situation, but it wouldn't be for the entire value. For the other two funding sources that we have to consider, we do have our available reserves as an option, and which they currently earn 2.2%, which is a savings of 0.24 or 2.24 million per year in our current holdings. However, the district plans to spend down some of that these reserves in the next few years, but does plan to have that reserve stay around $65 million. These funds are available within 1 week, but the district would have immediate access to $20 million at no cost, and the remainder would be available at a cost of 0.6%. And additionally, if the district waited a little while and extracted the funds over a month-long period, the cost would be very, very minor. And finally, there's the possibility of FEMA reimbursements. So in several examples from the FEMA site specifically, the receipt of funding after requests could vary for anywhere from 5 weeks to 2 years before that the requesting agency actually saw any money. There is an immediate need funding option through FEMA in which monies can be provided in approximately 60 days. However, that is extremely rare and extremely difficult to receive. For the next few slides, we have Karen Thiesing from ACWD JPIA to discuss the various excess insurance coverage options that are available for the district to purchase, and we thank her for coming in. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. I am Karen Thiesing, Director of Insurance Services at ACWD JPIA. So thank you for having us this evening and discussing your insurance needs. So I'd like to start to talk about what we quoted on and then back through this particular slide. So as Katie mentioned, one of the options that was presented or asked of us to present was a product known as difference in conditions.
short as DIC. And that contains both flood and earthquake coverage, and that was the number that Katie had presented a little while ago in the neighborhood of 240,000. And then as we continued our discussions, there were a lot of, well, what ifs? Can we carve out just the earthquake? Can we carve out just the flood? And the answer is yes. Whatever the district would like to see, we can do, with the caveat that we will need to be more specific when we go back out to our market. And our market is containing, well, right now we have 297 members in Aqua JPIA's property program. So we carry a lot of clout out in the market. And we have different structures how we provide the insurances to our membership. But one thing our reinsurers need to know is what are those marching orders. And once we have some clear direction, then I'm able to go out to the market and provide you different options to consider. And one of the things that we would also want to look at is your probable maximum loss, and that is known as a PML. And that goes to the point that Katie was making. Once certain decisions are made, do you want to cover all your assets, your key assets, your most vulnerable properties? So that's the decision-making process that we would need to go through before we can go back out to our reinsurers. So with that, the excess flood, yes, we can do. Katie had mentioned that we do have built-in limits within your program right now. I can share that Yuba County Water Agency does buy a standalone flood program that's dedicated for them. Similarly, we have Friant Water Authority that buys earthquake policy dedicated to them. So we do see a different reasons as to why our membership continues to buy additional coverage for their properties, their assets. So let's move on to business interruption coverage. So right now you are a part, or will be on July 1st, of what we call our all-risk program. So that's fire, theft, vandalism, windstorm. On the other side of the fence, we have earthquake or flood. So we have two separate buckets. And this business income can be found in both of those buckets. You have the ability to insure your income in an all-risk setting, so let's say fire. But that number, that income, needs to be scheduled. Just like we schedule our buildings on our statement of values, if you wish to protect against income, then we would need to schedule that. And when we went through the RFP process, that was not a request made at that time. We can certainly produce a number, of which we did give Katie and Jen some quotes already on that. So now let's go over to our other bucket, our earthquake bucket. If we are going to protect ourselves against the peril of earthquake and we want to insure our income if in the event of earthquake, there again we need to schedule that income value. So what does that look like? So the best, and unfortunately this has occurred recently, but if we have an agency that sustains heavy damage due to a wildfire, and their facility cannot generate or push forward the water in which they're to serve their constituent, that's a business income loss. And if that revenue is scheduled, then benefits, i.e. that revenue, would be paid back to the district. So that's important to note. You have it on both sides as an option, but it must be scheduled. And then moving down into the list, we have a coverage element which is already there. You don't have to schedule anything. It's called contingent business income interruption. And what the heck is that? Well, that's a scenario whereby your assets have not been damaged. Whether it's a fire or an earthquake, you are still operational, but something has now happened to the community in which you serve, and you can't provide the water because they cannot receive the water. So under that coverage loss, there's a $3 million limit that's automatically a part of your program. Nothing is needed. You have that right now on the fire side. Now moving down, if off-premises service interruption, again, what is that? That's another source of protecting you when you can't, when your utility, let me back up, excuse me, when your business partner has a peril whereby they impact your income. And the example that we see often are districts that are selling out to PG&E. So if something happened to PG&E and we could not sell our energy and put it on the grid, that is what is known as an off-premise service interruption. And that's an automatic, and that has a $25 million limit to it. So you have that on your fire side. Again, all this, other than business income, is built into your program as it is today. So those are a couple of the differences that you can think about. As Katie mentioned, this isn't an absolute must-do-it-now type of situation. We have members that choose to augment coverage throughout the program year, so there's no hard and fast date. All I do need, though, is enough concrete information so I can secure the right pricing for Alameda County Water. Jen, may I trouble you? There we go. So one of the questions posed to us at the Finance Committee meeting was, well, what other districts buy DIC, difference in condition or earthquake and flood? And we have 8 members that do so at this time. Most of them, as you can see, are in the Southern California region. So my guess is there are around a couple of the faults out in that part of our world, and they have chosen to do so because of seismic activity. Clearly, Tahoe City PUD, I'm not aware of any faults that are running through that region, but they may be buying for other purposes. So not a large amount of members. Remember, we have 297 folks in our program, and 8 choose to augment coverage. Again, we do have Yuba, who purchases their own additional flood, and we have Friant Water Authority purchases their own additional earthquake. So there was another question posed as to, well, why do these organizations buy earthquake and or flood? And that I do not know. We have not taken the time of our staff to go to these 8 and ask whether it's due to bond covenants, do they want to sleep better at night to ensure they have coverage if in the event an earthquake does happen, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't have those answers for you this evening. So it does go back down to risk tolerance. What is your risk appetite? Is the cost-benefit analysis such, too, that receiving millions of dollars immediately would offset your downtime? Katie did share that we're very quick and able to respond to disasters. Paradise Irrigation District, for example. Within the first 2 weeks, we provided a $300,000 check, and within 4 weeks, we provided them $1 million. So we do have the ability to act quickly. Our partners in these programs are public agency-centric. They understand what it means to be operational, and clearly, time is of essence when our communities are impacted. So that is, in a nutshell, what some of the puzzles you can figure out at some other point in time. And I'm happy to come back. We're happy to look at different modeling once we've got some more concrete values and direction. And I appreciate your time this evening. And if you have questions for me, please let me know. Thank you.
Open it up to Akbari, we'll start with.
Sure.
Start with Director Akbari. I think Director Weed and I made our cases in the last meeting, and then it stood still in our committee meeting.
So, a question on the business income coverage. What would you need from ACWD to properly schedule that business income and for us to get that coverage?
A value. And we did provide a quote, actually, for a $5.5 million limit, which, if I may, for a $5.5 million limit for business interruption on the all-risk side would be $3,809. We were also asked to provide a quote for a limit of $100 million, and that premium would be $69,255.
Just to clarify, this is on an annual basis.
That is correct.
Right.
Yes, that is correct.
This is not a rider. This is a separate standalone business loss if you did not have the other coverages, or you'd have to, this would be on top of one of the other coverages.
Well, it's already a part of our program, and
Okay. So we could do that independent of the earthquake and
yes,
and flood.
correct. Now, with the caveat, you wouldn't be able to do it with earthquake unless you had earthquake coverage, and then you would and could augment with BI. You already have your all-risk coverage, of which, again, fire and police, and you would just schedule your business income and have that coverage element available to you.
So, just to clarify for the other board members here, I did present a thought and ask a question related to what's being presented here. So we have, we're over $100 million of revenue. And my thought was that if we have a major quake, we already know we're going to have 1,000 to 2,000 main breaks and maybe tens of thousands of customers that are offline for some period of time. So we will incur loss of revenue. And I just speculated on my own part that maybe 50% coverage for 50% of our revenue, or $50 million of excess business insurance, the loss of revenue insurance, might be adequate, and that's about $35,000 per year for $50 million of coverage.
I could add on to that, though. You use the term scheduled income. Would a commodity loss of commodity sales be considered a scheduled income, or would it have to be a fixed charge, the fixed portion of it, the service charge being scheduled, and the commodity charge not being scheduled?
Commodities would not be allowable. So it's your income that you are the receipt of your water sales, okay, or your tax. So cities, for example, often have a large amount of tax revenue. They insure that. Okay. But loss within your portfolio is which I'm thinking what you mean by commodities.
Currently, 2/3 of our bill, of that $100 million, is commodity, 1/3 is service. It doesn't reflect what our actual costs are, but that would be an argument for getting a better balance between our commodity and our fixed cost, and maybe even a stronger argument for putting it on the property tax bill, where you have a clear definition and easily documentation of it being scheduled.
Director Weed, I don't think you're clearly grasping what they're saying here. It's the loss of our product revenue, loss of our water sales.
No, your scheduled revenue and the sale of a commodity.
Okay, so I think we need to define what commodity is. I think you're answering commodity in terms of a stock portfolio.
Yes.
So maybe I can clarify?
Yeah.
It's okay?
That's what,
So say, as an example, our average customer receives a $100 bi-monthly water bill, and an earthquake happens, and we're not able to serve those customers. What Director Weed is saying is about 30% of that or so is a fixed charge, a bi-monthly service charge, and then the balance, $70, would be the commodity sales. But the bill is $100. And I think the question relates to, in terms of the loss of, revenue insurance, what does the product cover?
Thank you for clarifying. It would be both of those.
Okay.
Yes.
And I would like to add one other, insert one other clarification here, if I may, for the other board members. On one slide, you said that FEMA does not make specific recommendations for public sector insurance coverage. However, and you're quite right on that, but when I explored around the FEMA website, what I came across was FEMA saying they do not cover loss of revenue or business interruption that's not reimbursable by the federal government. But they do outline that public agencies often go to the market for business interruption and loss of revenue insurance. And they note, like the case of Northridge when the earthquake happened, and that cities were affected for loss of property tax revenue, sales revenue, all kinds of other things, as well as the other public utilities in the area. So while they don't make a specific recommendation, it appears to me that they're highly encouraging you, if you are in a high-risk area or vulnerable to something, that, it's the smart thing to do.
And that, no, excuse me.
Yes, that is correct. They don't give a specific number, they don't give you a percentage, but they do highly encourage that you do have it.
And I just shared with Katie this evening, I read an article on April 29th from the FEMA director that they are starting to look and highly encourage both state and local government to be more self-sufficient in some of these areas. It was a widespread article, but there was a statement specifically about public entities looking to help further protect themselves.
So I do.
I got my questions answered.
Okay, so I do have a question in terms of the excess flood insurance and earthquake insurance. We know FEMA reimbursement has limitations on what we could seek reimbursement. How about the coverage in terms of flood and earthquake insurance, in terms of what's covered? Is there any limitations, or what are our boundaries? I just want to make sure that if we choose to go down this path, perhaps we could use the insurance money to cover the areas where it is unlikely for FEMA to reimburse us. So what I want to know is, what are the limitations in terms of our insurance coverage, what's covered, what's not?
So in terms of the insurance, it would cover your replacement costs of your assets. Okay, as long as we've scheduled those assets, which are your buildings, etc. And then similarly, you are able to insure on an earthquake policy your business income. So if we have a earthquake and you're not able to sell your product to your constituents, the business income element of an earthquake policy would respond and provide you those funds as long as those dollars were scheduled.
Oh boy. Okay, so are you telling me the excess earthquake insurance would cover the loss in revenue? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's another coverage element that you have available within an earthquake program.
Right.
And if you wish to, again, insure your income for the peril of an earthquake, you may, and then those monies would be provided to you under the coverage.
Okay, so what's the difference between that and the loss of revenue coverage?
Actually, those two terms are synonymous. Loss of revenue equals business income interruption.
So I think what we're talking about here is the district originally received the $240,000 premium cost for earthquake insurance in the amount of $25 million, and that would cover sort of repairs and earthquake-induced damage. But it doesn't cover the loss of revenue or the business continuity. That would be an additional element in your earthquake policy, or your earthquake, I guess, what would you call it, an earthquake premium coverage, to that's additional. So say, for example, you wanted $25 million in coverage for both damage and business continuity in the amount of $100 million. You would add the $240,000 premium for the earthquake insurance, $25 million, and the $70,000 that would get you $100 million in revenue, loss of revenue, business continuity coverage. Is that correct?
That's the idea of it, yes,
Okay.
yes.
But you can't get the business continuity insurance for earthquakes unless you get the earthquake insurance as well.
That is correct.
Okay. So I guess back to question for Katie. So any overlaps between, so I assume there'll be overlaps between what FEMA will reimburse us and what's eligible for this insurance coverage.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is some overlap there where you, and this was a concern that Director Weed had, was they don't allow for duplication of benefits. So if we receive FEMA funding and utilize it to repair a facility that we have scheduled on our insurance, it's say TP2, then you can still receive FEMA funding, but they are going to reduce it by however much the insurance money, or however much insurance money you received when you submitted the claim. So there, yeah, that can be there.
And then they're going to require us to insure it for that full amount that they gave us.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So one question that the board posed to staff was, so how would we kind of deal with this, like if there was a big event? And so it kind of depends on how you'd like to handle the risk. You know, we have about $130 million in reserves. We have a $10 million line of credit, which can be expanded. And then the question is, you know, sort of whether the district wants to obtain additional insurance coverage. You know, the big earthquake on the Hayward Fault is going to be an event of, you know, almost incomprehensible magnitude. So the numbers that we would experience in terms of damage would dwarf the numbers, I think, that we're talking about today. So it kind of depends on how, you know, how you want to deal with that. Does it matter? But, you know, sort of what we're talking about is say you got $100 million of insurance, that would give us access to quick capital. We'd also be using our reserves, and I'm sure we'd be accessing our line of credit. And then we'd have FEMA as the backstop. And then you would have a loss of revenue in such a catastrophic event, because there would be customers out of service potentially for a couple of months, easy.
Or even up to a year, 9 months.
Some, yeah. I think the last time we did the analysis with the magnitude 7 event on the Hayward Fault, yes, it was about 1,200 main breaks. I think we were able to get 90% of our customers with improvements that we've been working on, and most of which we've completed within about a 2-month period. That last 10%, though, lingers because it's going to take a while. So, you know, that's the question that the board is struggling with is, you know, how do you want to deal with this relative to the cost per year to obtain the additional coverage? And so there's a couple approaches. One approach is you can talk together, see if you can come up with some sort of consensus. Another approach is express your views to staff, and then we'll come back with some sort of proposal that sort of takes into account all those views and get some actual better numbers on cost. So it seems to me that those would be two potential workable options depending on how you want to deal with this. And there's no rush. knock on wood, the earthquake could happen like now. But there's no rush in terms of our insurance provider. We can work on this over time and come back and spend a workshop on it, or come up with some sort of maybe a board retreat to figure this out. Whatever you want to do, staff stands ready, and we'd be happy to assist in any way we can. But it's fundamental because it's how does the district deal with these kind of risks, and there's no right or wrong.
You know, Director Weed and I have had some fairly vigorous debates on this subject, and it reminds me of in the pre-cable news days, of a show I really like called Point Counterpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was spoofed on Saturday Night Live as well.
Right. And so we've been doing this point counterpoint, but it's really been actually very good, because along the way, when you're challenged on things, you're learning things at the same time. So I just want to remind the rest of the board that when I first joined the board, I was already encouraging us to get the line of credit. And we only did that recently in the last year or so. But having a line of credit is really to expedite getting things done very, very quickly, but we do owe the money back. So it's not free money. It's not a long-term loan that we're financing. It's just there to help us get up and running very quickly. We can, of course, under that line of credit, I believe, reach out for another $50 million.
Yeah, one of the benefits of the line of credit is that it provides us with almost instantaneous access to the $10 million, but because you've got this relationship already in place, it expedites additional credit should the district wish to go for that.
So I look at it this way. I see the limited number of districts or public utilities in Southern California that have the excess insurance. But as I look at it, ACWD and East Bay Mud are probably the two most vulnerable water districts in the state of California, because we're both on the Hayward Fault, and I would include the city of Hayward as well. And it is the highest risk earthquake fault in the entire nation. We're in the 151st year since the last quake. The average periodicity on the Hayward Fault of 7.0 is between 90 and 165 years, with the average being 140 years. We are over the median of 140, and we're quickly, nearing what's been identified as the longest interval between quakes. So I think it's common sense that we have to protect this community as much as possible. I don't want to be sitting here after an earthquake and then have people saying, well, why didn't you protect us any better? This is common sense. I think it's just sensible for the amount of money that we're paying for the coverage. It's not that expensive to put in place something like $25 million property insurance, which, like Mr. Shaver said, is minor compared to what we can imagine the damages will be. And we had $1.5 billion in assets identified years ago, which I'm sure is well above that today. So we're just trying to cover the very basics here, and to put in place $50 million of loss of revenue protection. Also, I think it makes the most sense for the price we're paying, $300,000 a year or less, to protect this district. I would highly encourage us to put in place these kind of excess policies.
Counterpoint? almost 300 members, of which 8 are carrying this excess coverage, either all or in part, flood or earthquake. We don't have a breakout on that. They're all small districts. And my own personal experience comes into play here. When I was on a community college board where we carried excess earthquake insurance until we were told that, well, FEMA's going to rebuild your facilities and will deduct any claim that you receive from the insurer from the amount of money they give to you. So there's no net, in most cases, unless we can better identify where there's differences in the coverage, there's no net benefit to the district in the long run. I am a strong proponent of contingency planning and response. I think the business innovation, I'd encourage us to do a little more research on the scheduled income. On my personal experience, I carry earthquake insurance on some commercial properties I have. About 4 to 5 years ago, all of the admitted companies in California got out of the market. I had State Farm and Farmers, all of them got out. Had to go to Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's of London, which is the insurer here that they're talking about, is not an admitted insurer in the state of California. You don't have the state backup in case that happens. You just hope that the syndicate that they work with will honor the agreement. They're not mandated by the state to do so.
Director Weed, there are a lot of reinsurers
Okay.
Available to go to. I don't want to mislead the board that we're going to Lloyd's of London.
It would be, well, that's the one that they have gone to with JPIA, where they got their quote, and it would be interesting to see, maybe there are others, but it'd be interesting to see if there's an admitted insurer in California that would be willing to take on some of this liability. We had talked as to why a company would a district would do this, and 2 came to mind. One, they actually had a claim and were now required by FEMA to now carry the excess insurance. We don't know how many of those 8 might have actually turned in a claim for flood or earthquake and now are carrying it. Second is that their own financial situation was so poor when they went out for debt that either through a bond covenant or the underwriter requesting that they carry this insurance, and so that they could then get a reasonable rate on a return on their bonds. That information we don't have. And those are both arguments for. On the issue of scheduled income, I can get my leases, and the income I get from a lease is scheduled. I can show that as income that I have a contractual requirement for. But if I have on a business, on a small retail, I cannot claim loss of sales because I've historically had a number of sales, because the insurance companies have told me that that's not scheduled. I cannot put that as an insured interest. It will only insure something for which there's some type of a contractual relationship. That may transfer into the public sector as well. It would be interesting to see what that definition of scheduled income is. If we have $250,000 to $300,000 a year to put toward contingency planning, I encourage us to look at what we did at the time of workers' comp when that became a really suspect. We began setting aside a separate fund to cover workers' comp so that we had the potential of becoming self-insured. Later, the state got its act together, workers' comp came in line, and we had that reserve that we were able then to apply to a retirement plan for management employees, and covered it, fully funded it. I would hope that contingency planning becomes, that we begin to take it as a district, view it as a district issue, rather than just operations, how you're going to reprogram and restructure the district, and start investing monies from an identifiable fund to address contingency planning and engineering. And that this $250,000, both for economic reserve and for funding those type of programs, would be, in my mind, a better use of the funds. Insurance is inherently expensive because the people you're insuring with hope to make a profit on it. That's why it's priced at that, whatever level they price it, to evaluate the risk. So those are the balances. I would lean, first, let's fund and set up a contingency planning capability and develop a district contingency plan, fund that, and if we have additional funds, then we can still look at insurance, we'll get more information. I would note also that this started when we were in a committee meeting looking at our overall insurance portfolio, and staff turned to the two board members and said, well, what do you think about excess insurance? We had none of this information in which to respond at the time. And our positions haven't changed since that initial request.
Not quite. Certainly not going to throw any gasoline on the fire. I kind of look at this as, you know, no matter which way we go, I mean, we could say, yes, let's do this, and something happens 5 years from now, God forbid. We all pat ourselves on the back, we say, good job. We can ignore it. 30 years, nothing happens, and I'm not here. Or if I am, I certainly don't remember what I did tonight. For that matter, when I came into the meeting that night, 30 years from now. So, it's a hard call. I mean, I think the general manager's right. I mean, we're trying to decide is what level of risk do we want to do here, and certainly the Hayward fault is a risk, and we're right on top of it. One of my concerns is if the Hayward fault lets go in Berkeley or Oakland, FEMA's not going to know who we are, because they're going to be so busy up in Oakland and Berkeley. We'll get some attention from them, but we're certainly not going to get any political attention down here. They're going to look at us and they're going to say, why didn't you guys do this before? So they're not, I really doubt Oakland and Berkeley are doing it. They're going to get FEMA to respond. It seems to be the way, which bothers me. I've seen this before. Well, let's let FEMA come in and clean it up. So it costs money to be responsible. It's frustrating to be responsible. Director Weed is actually, in my opinion, a lot right. We could spend this money on contingency. We already have done an incredible amount of work on contingency planning. You know, the district is great, and we're looking at this. How many other districts of our size are looking at this? I question that. I really have any of them. I question whether the communities have looked at this. Lots of places come to mind. Hurricanes, kind of frequent on the East Coast. I'm from the East Coast. Certain areas prepared. Hurricane Katrina didn't hit New Orleans. It hit Louisiana. Never heard about Louisiana. Levee collapsed in New Orleans. And they blame FEMA. So I get frustrated whenever I even hear the word FEMA, because I know in the end FEMA's going to get blamed, and actually local responsibility doesn't belong with FEMA, it belongs with us. That's how I personally feel. And for all those communities, I'm going to say it, that come out there and say it's the federal government's fault, it's not. So then the question now goes to responsibility and the money. I mean, I don't love spending money on insurance. I really don't. Sorry. But when it comes to disasters, I also look at we're responsible here. And it's almost our responsibility to do it. Not blame the federal government when it happens. We've already done it though. We've gone out, we fixed our pipes, we fixed our crossings. We're trying to work on our system. So we're being responsible. The question is, what level of responsibility do we take? So it's a great conversation to have. I wish I had a good answer. I could put, oh yeah, that's it. But I can't, because part of me says, I don't want to spend the money on the insurance. Once again, no offense, but then again, boy, if we spend it and 5 years from now, we had that, yeah, we'd be patting ourselves on the back. FEMA's not going to help us that much. I mean, they will help. And because we're responsible, we'll probably we'll be good at getting FEMA money, because we know what to do, and we're ready for it. But I'm not sure they're going to be able to cover everything we need. And so I'm kind of leaning on looking at this, saying, yeah, maybe we ought to go this direction. It's going to cost us some money, but then we got to figure out how much. That's kind of where I'm leaning at the moment, because that's a personal belief. When I look at a disaster, a personal belief is we always blame the federal government, yet the responsibility is local. Puerto Rico, got nothing to do with, well, very little to do with the federal government, everything to do local. They didn't do their homework. Their infrastructure was a mess before the hurricane. You're in Hurricane Alley down there. They're not new. One of these years, Connecticut's going to get hit by a hurricane. New York City is going to get hit by a hurricane. Everybody called Superstorm Sandy. No, that was not a superstorm. That was a standard hurricane that went up, and it didn't even hit New York. It hit New Jersey. So I'm kind of preaching here, but you know, I am kind of following it because I feel that way. I kind of feel like we should be looking at this. I don't know if that helps staff any.
Well, I'm kind of hesitant to even throw this out, but if it helps the board, something like President Sethy was proposing, which would be $310,000 or so per year, approximately, we'd have to cost it out, is in the order of the savings that we received by doing an RFP for. That is not an issue, because just because you save money doesn't mean you should spend money, but just trying to give you context for the amount that we're talking about.
Director Akbari has a comment, and so do I.
Yeah. Sorry for interrupting. Just trying to help.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm strongly in favor of getting the excess insurance coverage. When I think about what our responsibility here is, it's to protect our infrastructure, and in an emergency scenario, it's to try to get everything up and running as quickly as possible, and that's going to require a tremendous amount of capital. And this is one of the avenues for us to do so. And I think it's just a smart move. When we're talking about a pretty small incremental cost on an annual basis compared to the benefit that we would receive if we were hit with a catastrophic event, which is more of a when scenario than an if scenario. And you know, I still remember, you know, watching on TV the devastation in New Orleans, and I think maybe that kind of gave me a more jaded perspective on FEMA, but I just don't find them to be as reliable of an agency as one would hope. And so it's incumbent upon us to be as prepared as possible for any catastrophe that could potentially hit, so that we can go back to our ratepayers and say, look, we prepared as best we could for an emergency that we were pretty sure was going to come. And I think we're already saving $310,000-ish from
just by switching
previous insurance coverage. We're putting just a portion of those cost savings towards getting $50 to $100 million worth of additional insurance that we didn't have previously. And so I think, from my perspective, that is a very wise decision, and so I would strongly encourage us to go in that direction.
So for me personally, there's a difference between FEMA response and FEMA reimbursement. Those are very two different things. We could talk about the quality of response some other time. So in terms of reimbursement, personally, I do have issues with buying insurance on something that FEMA would reimburse us.
Mm-hmm.
Because our taxpayers actually pay into the fund that FEMA is going to use to pay us back. So that's a little bit of a philosophical issue. But then in terms of impact to our customers, and to speak to the risk and speak to how we serve our customers, there's actually a request for you, and I'm not sure if that's possible or not. So look back, if you could talk to the water district down in Southern California, after the Northridge earthquake, what is the impact to them financially? How do they find the money to recover? How fast does it take them to recover? And what is the impact to their customers' bill? Because for me, this whole discussion about loss of revenue has to do with how fast can we recover the money back from our customers. After all, it has to come out from all our customers, including the 5 of us here. So it really is, how much insurance do I want to buy to minimize this impact to them? So that is the type of information I am looking at. I could be convinced to buy this insurance, but I just need a little bit more information, because I would like to look at it in terms of not just how fast we could recover, but what is the impact to our customers' bill. Because after all, that would be the foremost to them after a disaster.
And with that concern, we have the consideration of we would be able to adjust the levels. So if we had the earthquake DIC coverage, if you wanted to have it lower on the property, higher on the business interruption, because that's the greater concern, is that the money is going to come from there, because we know FEMA is going to reimburse us on our scheduled properties already. Well, then we still need to have that overarching earthquake coverage, but maybe put more emphasis on that business interruption option, so that we would still utilize those funds from FEMA.
I definitely understand that, and that's why I want to see, is there any real life example in terms of what is the exact dollar impact? What are we protecting our customers from? Is it from tripling their water bill, doubling their water bill, or just a 50-cent increase? So just a little bit of a magnitude, and how long, basically how painful is it? Mm-hmm. And is it worth me spending that money to make it less painful?
So just so that you know, what the event that we would be talking about on the Hayward Fault, which is a lateral strike slip fault, would be different than the blind thrust event that they had at Northridge. So it would be a different kind of
Yes, it's
damage.
different type of damage, but at least that's the only thing I could think of that would at least give me an idea
fair
of
enough.
the pain that our customers will be suffering, because we don't have any other income except recovering it from our customers, right?
So it's just a different phenomenon.
Yeah, I'll follow up quickly on that. The Mission Fault. Okay.
Not in an urban area.
All right. But
what we have is a fault that bisects our service area, and it's going to do a lateral movement. Northridge was one plate going under another, and mostly ground shaking induced damage, but they did have at that location at the epicenter, they did have gas main breaks and water breaks, but not, we would expect more. We would have more.
Well, the Mission Fault is a hidden thrust fault. Russell Gramer, the USGS, has said that that's capable of an earthquake 2 to 4 times greater than the one on the Hayward Fault. It was listed for shaking purposes as a Type A for a while, when the Hayward Fault was only a Type B, greater than 7.0. Political reasons, they've dropped it back down. It was on the Alcos-Piola for a while, but didn't have surface expression, but there's a lot of microseismicity. That is the most dangerous fault in our service area, and it is a hidden thrust fault. It's on the USG, it's on the Uniform Building Code since 1998 as an attachment, and it's documented. City of Fremont chose to ignore it in their hazardous mitigation plan, but it's there, it's real, and it's documented. So that is the, so I think we may well have a parallel to Northridge in our disservice area. But I would like to comment quickly on the basic approach. What is contingency planning and resources? In a contingency environment, it's a different type of engineering entirely from what we've experienced through a capital construction or O&M. You have unlimited resources. They're only limited by your ability to gainfully employ the resources when they that are available out there, and they're almost unlimited. So if you can spend some money now so that when an event occurs, you can gainfully employ the support that's available, that is your biggest leverage. That is your best insurance. And that is something that we have not done, on my mind, adequately. And I would hope that if we had $250,000 to $300,000 a year, that would be a wonderful place to put the money. And maybe we should consider doubling down. But if you're going to put money in insurance here, the much greater immediate return to us as a multiple of the return, and probably equaling the amount of insurance, is to put some money into seismic preparation for a major seismic event. And assuming it's seismic, you don't know what it could be. There are other issues too, dam breaks, etc. But that strikes me as being the approach or priority that I would have in this case.
I have a few more comments. I would like staff to really evaluate whether we need the flood insurance. That's something I'm not really sure of. I can see earthquake and business interruption insurance, but is there any value to having flood insurance in our area?
We do have some flood areas that are identified in the district. The board itself has expressed concern in the past regarding sea level rise and potential flood events attributed to that, especially now that a lot of the development in the community is occurring in low-lying areas. Mm-hmm. So that's just a sort of stream of consciousness response, but we can certainly look at potentially different levels of coverage, right, for flood.
Yes, and mind you, you do have flood already in your all-risk program, mm-hmm. depending on what zone you are in. And again, that's shared. So you do have some, you're not completely without, but yes, we can also look at flood as an excess, similar to Yuba County Water Agency.
So the other thing I wanted to point out was I mentioned in one of our committee meetings that I was following a very detailed NPR, National Public Radio, in-depth investigation into what has happened in Paradise and Paradise Irrigation District that was brought up here earlier. They have 175 miles of pipeline in their district, and what they have discovered, post-fire event, is that there's a lot of benzene and volatile organic products in the system, and they don't really have the ability to flush that system out. There are too many melted pipes and other things. So they're having to look to rebuild their entire pipeline network in Paradise. And it's not a real wealthy community, and the county's going to have to share in that. FEMA is hardly being responsive. They've only given the community $1.5 million as of this date. $1.5 million since last fall. So the residents are forced to bring in water cisterns that they have to replenish, once a week or once a month, depending upon the size. So that's a real issue. Further, and I forwarded this to Mr. Shaver last week, I sat in on the live webinar for Region 1 and 2 that was presented last week on the fires in Santa Rosa, Reading and the other big one up there. And it was really an eye-opener as to how long it takes to recover. This is all from the water perspective, okay? So, for example, in the city of Santa Rosa, they also had, in one part of the community, the wealthier part of the community that was up toward the hills, a benzene and other volatile substances in the water system. And it took them a year to clear out the system, but they were under tremendous pressure because from the residents, FEMA only gives people a certain amount of living expenses, and to rebuild their property, they have to start it within 2 years and have water up and running on their property and sewer and gas, electricity. The residents were putting a lot of pressure on the water district and the city, or the public works department, to clean up that water system. And they were looking at potentially $30 to $40 million just to clear out one neighborhood. Similar problems happened up in the city of Reading, where the fire came right into town, and these other communities. So there are all kinds of things that can happen with the water system, and it made me think of the fact that if we have a major quake, we're susceptible to the quake, but we also have, maybe 50% of our community is in a subsidence zone too. So we could see cracked pipes with all kinds of nasty things going into the water system. It'd take a long time to clear out. So those are just some other factors to think about. Again, I think it would be very prudent on our part to move forward with this insurance. $300,000 a year, here's the way I look at it. We're spending $500,000 to $2 million a mile to replace or upgrade our pipelines, refurbish our pipelines. If we're willing to do, and we're trying to do 10 miles a year or so, here for a fraction of that cost, we're insuring, the vital assets of this district.
Would you like me to take a stab at a potential staff
If you're ready to
action?
take a stab at this, let's go. Yeah, it works.
Okay, so I'm looking over at Katie. We could see if we can get some firmer numbers on $25 million of earthquake insurance, as well as $50 million in business continuity. That's about, the 240, 275 range in terms of premium cost. In parallel with that, respond to Director Huang's question to try to come up with some similar scenarios to give some supporting data to help you determine what your position is, and come back to the board at a future meeting with that data as well as the response to Director Huang's questions, and see what happens. We have time. We'll look at our current workload, and we'll pick a board meeting in which the agenda is relatively light. If that's okay.
Yes, thank you.
Good.
Do you have everything you need for now?
No. We will need to have the discussion, Katie and I, in terms of would you like to insure all of the assets, the total insured values that were provided to us prior, or a portion thereof? That's the one missing
Okay,
piece.
so, yeah, I think we as staff should take a look at that with the idea of looking at assets that are at the most risk and the most vital, and try to come up with the sweet spot in terms of the coverage of what, say, $25 million could cover.
Yes, and then at that point in time, the underwriters will do a probable maximum loss analysis once we issue that quote. And in terms of the environment, the liquefaction factors within this region. That may or may not impact the bottom line, but that's the next phase after nailing down what scope we want to have quoted.
Okay. Board okay with that approach?
Yes?
Okay. Thank you for wrestling with these tough-to-wrestle-with issues. I think you worked hard as a board today to try to come to grips with this, and thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item 6.3.1 is complete now.
Right.
Let's move on up to board committee reports, I believe.
And staff was not planning on covering any of the board committee reports, but we stand ready to respond to any questions.
Hearing none. Operational reports?
Similar approach by staff. We are available to respond to any questions on any of the reports.
I would just like to point out the hardness map this week looks one of the best I've seen. I mean, very phenomenal. Thank you.
So water treatment plant number 2 has been offline. It's just coming back online this week, so we'll try to continue that good performance.
That's what I'm talking about up in Union City.
Yeah, yeah,
So-
which doesn't impact Union City that much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No other operational report comments? Then we'll move on.
I
to-
would just note that our operations so far this year have been less than 30 MGD per day, and when you have well over 80 MGD capacity, we're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, and if the board's interested in seeing what historical demand has been, we do have a slide that we can share that shows that over the past few years, because I know that at least one director has expressed concern about low demand, but staff feels that we are on track to sort of match our current planning assumptions. So
It
if
would be interesting.
just
We
just
have
for
it.
a moment, I think
Oh,
it might
we
be
do.
worthwhile.
Yeah, it's a
Yes. And Mr. Neiser would be happy to just kind of explain this graph. This wasn't prepared for presentation at a board meeting per se, so I apologize for some of the small fonts, but it's still, I think, pretty informative. Gives you an indication of what water demand has been.
Thanks. This is just a summary from a few more slides that were presented to the Water Resources Committee this last week. Long overdue analysis that was requested on the continued process of rebound after in demands after the recent drought and the ordinance. And what you could see, this is a compilation of all the charts, but what we can see is that after the drought, we've seen in successive years in 2015, then to 2016, and 2017 and 18. Sorry, I'm using my laser pointer on the other slide for those who are looking there. Is this one better here?
Yes, it's
Okay.
better because
Either that would describe the line color.
yeah.
Yeah, I can't tell from here. This bottom line is, I believe, 2015. This is the first year out of our drought scenario. Excuse me, 2016. 2015.
15.
At 2016, we saw a progressive increase in summertime demands. And then 17 and 18, we saw, 17 made a predictable rebound, and then in 18 was dead on the same as 17, and we had a lot of speculation as to maybe we'd stalled out. But what we found is that the summer of 2018, the net evapotranspiration, which is the plant demand for water, it's weather-driven, temperature, humidity-driven. 2018 had the coolest summer by evapotranspiration that we have on our record at our CIMMIS station. In fact, it was 12% below average, coolest since 2001. And so when we normalize the data for weather and predictable behavior, we feel that 2018 can't be addressed as being a leveled out of demand. In fact, it's somewhat predictable based on the standard things we use to forecast demands. And so we feel that we cannot at this point say that we are not going to see a continued demand rebound, and so this is our current projection for summer of 2019, assuming that we have average weather conditions. As noted earlier, demands have been a bit low so far, but we had a very wet late winter and spring. It's wet average, we'd call it. And we just had enough rain where our customers have shown their demonstrated response to weather and curtailing irrigation demands. So everything is really indicating that our customers are just being very responsible with weather. Assuming that this, Gina, could you skip it forward? So assuming oh, that's really great. It shows up kind of funny on the web application, but you can see this is our predicted rebound from the drought, that 5-year rebound. To date, we've been following pretty much spot on the slope of that line. We're just off about 6 months in our assumption as to when the drought would be over. And that's our forecast for 2019 right there. So we think there's no reason to believe that demands are not continuing to rebound. In fact, we should know within the next month if weather stays average, and as we're seeing warm weather right now.
So.
And the other interesting thing is indoor water use remains almost at drought levels.
Yeah, well, what we've come to learn is that, we figured this out during the drought, is that a lot of our customers basically used to run their sprinklers through the winter, and people have just gotten better with that. So that indoor wintertime demand, which we historically called indoor, there's probably a couple of MGD of irrigation demand even in the middle of the rainy season. That was just basically wasteful use of water.
Where my concern has historically been is the disconnect between fixed cost and fixed income, and variable income and variable cost. Because when you don't have a predictable sales, it can vary dramatically, and we can bump our rates, but only if we have a water supply emergency. None of this involves anything near a water supply emergency, unless we do a Jimmy Buffett. It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Okay, I think we're into, no, I think we have another general manager's report.
Yes, thank you. We do have 2 general manager reports for you this evening. The first one involves AB 217. At the board workshop on October 25th, the board requested that I add an item to this evening's agenda to allow the board to discuss AB 217, the Safe Drinking Water for All Act. This bill was introduced by Assembly Member Eduardo Garcia, and there are a number of co-authors identified on the bill, including Assembly Member Quirk, who represents a portion of our service area. So AB 217 would establish the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund in the State Treasury and would provide that monies in the fund are continuously appropriated to the State Board to provide a source of funding to secure access to safe drinking water for all Californians, particularly those in disadvantaged communities, while also ensuring the long-term sustainability of drinking water service and infrastructure. Hot off the presses, a new bill version was just introduced today. So if you did read the language that I sent to you, that is now obsolete. The new bill is very similar to the previous bill, but now, as it's currently proposed, the bill clarifies that it would establish the statewide safe and affordable drinking water system charge of 50 cents per month per service connection. And that would become effective on July 1st, 2020, and then by July 1st annually thereafter, and there's opportunities to have that charge adjusted. So the previous version of the bill didn't really make it clear what it looked like. It was 50 cents per year per customer, but it's 50 cents per month. So $6 for every ACWD district customer per year. Per year, sorry. But now, what they're proposing is the first version of the water tax was going to be on the bills. The second version, which we referred to at the committee at the workshop, was going to be a state board charge to all agencies. But now they're talking about just incorporating this fee into each public water system's annual system charge for their public water system to the Division of Drinking Water at the state board. So it becomes sort of a just, well, how many customers do you have? We add this to the bottom line of the state board. In addition, the bill would require the legislative analyst to report to the legislature and the state board if the legislative analyst determines that on or before January 1st, 2023, that at least $3 billion has been made available in an interest-bearing account in the state treasury with a goal of at least $100 million per year going towards O&M related costs for the systems that are benefiting from that revenue. There's also a provision that maybe 20% of the charge would come back to all water agencies, but this bill is actually pretty fluid still. The bill still has provisions for fertilizer and milk taxes, similar to the previous water tax proposal from last year. Aqua is leading a coalition to oppose the bill, and many agencies have signed on. Regarding ACWD's efforts, Director Sethy had an interesting idea that he raised to me, which included the possibility of using the relatively new internet sales tax revenue that was recently imposed by the state as the revenue stream to fund this program. So I thought that was a pretty good idea. So we raised, both Director Sethy and I raised this possibility with our Sacramento representative, Jonathan Clay, who discussed the concept with Cindy Tuck at Aqua. In talking to Cindy, she didn't have concerns with the proposal, which is good, and from her perspective, Aqua wouldn't care as long as the source of funds isn't coming from water agencies. So it's possible that Aqua is incorporating Director Sethy's suggestion into its conversations at the Capitol.
Let me clarify. I was up in Sacramento one day with Jonathan Clay, and so we had a conversation about this, and to put a finer point on this, the proposal I was making was that the internet sales tax, which started April 1, is primarily an out-of-state tax on people selling merchandise into California. And they expect it to be $1 to $2 billion in the first year, and it's going to go up very fast from there. They say by the end of the decade it could be $10, $20 billion contributing to our state budget. And my thought was if you could put a cap on the amount, $150 million a year, it would diminish over time as a percent of the total taxes being collected.
Right.
And it's being paid by people from essentially out of state.
Right.
So Jonathan really liked the idea, and so he started to explore it and found out that there was reception not only from Cindy Tuck but other people at the Capitol.
So those conversations are occurring in back channels in the Capitol, and you know, there is pushback though, because that revenue was going to the general fund, and there's lots of entities out there that would love to get their hands into the general fund too. So we'll have to see how this plays out. It's also possible that Aqua is kind of keeping a straight opposed position to keep it simple on the bill for now, hoping that there isn't the internal fortitude to basically initiate a new tax in the legislature and in the governor's office.
I still like, if I can call it my idea, better, because you don't have to save up $3 billion first. You can just immediately go and access the new tax revenue.
Right, and there are other competing proposals too. So anyway, I also agreed that it was a good idea. But anyway, for the purposes of AB 217 and ACWD for right now, we have taken a watch position on this bill. I've also been in contact with Jonathan Clay today and asked him to do some reconnaissance work in Assemblymember Quirk's office, which he did, and reported back to me, because I said, you know, I have directors who talked with Mr. Quirk on this issue last year, and seemed like he was pretty firm in the position of not having a water tax at that time, and then seeing him as a co-author on the bill kind of gave them the feeling that there was, like, they have whiplash. It's like, what happened? And trying to be responsive to President Gunther's question. And he wasn't able to talk to the Assembly member, but he was able to talk to one of his staff members in the Capitol. And essentially the way it was characterized is, yes, that's true, but over this intervening time, his ideas have evolved in that it's been like a year or two, and the problem is huge, and it needs to be fixed, and he feels that we got to do something, and this bill is a mechanism to potentially do that, and the bill is still a work in progress. So moving forward with something is kind of the position that he sort of landed on. So if you have not been in contact with him over this period of time where his opinion has been evolving, yes, you could have whiplash, but it's been sort of a while coming. That is how it was characterized to me from our Sacramento representative. So he does, the Assembly member certainly is aware of the district's concerns with anything that adds to the cost of a water bill. So with that, I will stop and allow you all to discuss if there is anything that you would like us to do as staff or the district regarding AB 217 at this time. The way I see it, our options are do nothing, continue a watch position, join a coalition such as Aqua, they're still asking for entities to join the coalition, or take an agency position, which could be a number of different things.
Well,
I'd like to start. I just say maintain the status quo, what we're doing.
one, I don't know how much influence we have as a whole, and it's a statewide issue. I was going to report later on the agenda on my visit with the PPIC, which is a conference which Laura Heides and I went to. Aqua, ACWD is the sponsor, so we get 2 registrations with that. But that was a group that came out of this camp, and the feeling is that they complete. They've created a social cause, tied it to a social cause, played up a, I think, somewhat unsupported question as to nitrates being a major contaminant issue from a health standpoint. They're not. And have been able to get control of the State Water Resources Control Board, have the ear of the governor with their appointments, and this train is going down the path. Aqua was inept and even negligent in their failure to respond to this issue over the years. I personally tried to get them and started a program along the Mexican border, which died when Betty Beltman was president of Aqua some 15, 20 years ago, and the organization was out of tune and tone deaf to the water as a human rights issue. It's now come back that we now have this issue. It would be helpful if this water tax, which is not necessarily geared to any particular program or effective program, would be the districts which had demonstrated that they could address it themselves, as we have with our Help on Water on Tap program, would be given credit, not in their frame of reference. This is money to go to the state to administer a state program with state staffing and fund efforts that they will, as with the environmental community, will continue to find ways to spend the funds. There will always be some inequity somewhere. So frustrated, disappointed, and feel somewhat anything we do would be somewhat inconsequential. And yet, so at this point, why not just watch and Aqua's going to fall on their sword, and they're going to lose. Thank you.
No more for me.
I'm comfortable with current position.
I guess I just have to point out that this is an issue. It's been quite a few years that since I looked at the data, we do have issues in California with blue babies from nitrate. So there are definitely issues with community that's not getting safe drinking water. However, there's a very big however. Most of those communities are farming communities. The pollution is caused by the farmers, the ag, that I'm a firm believer in polluter pays, not our customer, who do not cause the problem. I don't believe the portion that the milk tax and the fertilizer tax is high enough to cover the problems they actually cause. That is actually my objection to this whole thing, is that the people who create the problem should really address the problem, not coming back to our customers who are how many 100 miles away to collect money to address this issue.
Which is why you say there's a problem, but there has been no demonstrated incident within a public water supply or even investor-owned water supply. In the case of a Blueberry, that was a private well
I think you're
about
correct.
10
That
years
was,
ago.
There were private
and
wells.
One or two, a few private wells, but none related to the people that are being taxed. They're proposed to be taxed.
I don't know if I should say anything on tape. I went to one of those conferences and heard the quote, brown water for brown people, and I should have that conference looked that up right away, because I was horrified at that. I looked it up, and the only quote I could find was from some comedian in Cleveland about Flint, Michigan, and it had nothing to do with water. And this is being thrown about by one of the panelists up there after another one said she was privileged. It was just garbage. I understand there's a problem. We have our public here that can't afford to pay their bill, and nobody is helping us. Nobody. We had to go try to do it ourselves. We were creative, figured out a way we could get around it. Nobody's helping us. Here's an opportunity that they could do, but they don't care. They only care about their headlines. They only care about, they don't know where they're going to spend the money. They don't know how they're going to spend the money. They're just going to collect it. This is like what happened with San Francisco in the last election when, Benioff? Was it Benioff? With the homeless tax on the businesses. Oh yeah, we're going to raise all this money. And the city went, how are we going to spend it? We have a budget surplus right now. They could be spending that money right now on fixing things and facilities. They know what the problem is. They know how to do it. They just want to collect it from somebody else. Tax somebody. I hate to say it. I'm not a Republican anymore. I used to be. I'm not anymore. Before that I was a Democrat. So, before anybody comes on record, well, he's just some Republican, No! Newsom gets elected, and the next thing you know, here comes the water tax. Well, the first thing's out of his mouth. There are other ways to do this. We don't have to tax our residents, some of which can't afford to pay it. That last rate hearing, about 1,000 people, that was a 4% rate increase. And we had 1,000 people, many of them coming in saying, how am I going to do this? I heard it again. There's no help for them in here. Now, Assemblymember Quirk could get me some help in here. He said it's fluid. I'm willing to listen. At that point, I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to pay a little bit more on my water bill if I thought it's going to help some of my residents who can't. But I'll be damned if they have to pay. We're out in the valley, where some of them can't afford it, by the way, because it's good political theater, because that's what this is. Political theater. They're not fixing the problem. They don't care about the problem. They want to look good. Look what we did. Advance their cause. They don't care about the systems. If they did, they'd be out there right now with that budget surplus doing something about it. Would have been doing it previously. So I say, I oppose it. Assemblymember Quirk, you want me to come in line? Then help us out. Cut us some of these funds so that we could help a percentage of our people. We have a pretty good idea what that number is. There's no reason we should be we're already using our revenue. We should be getting at least credit for that from our district. That we're helping our own. Yeah, I'm willing to help the others too, but I want to see what the results are. This is just going to go, and it's going to evaporate. There's no plan. Plan is to collect money. More money and more money. Oh yeah, we're gonna fix everything, and then we're gonna run it with this money. Well, cripes, guys, what are we doing right now? We have a surplus. You could be starting on this right now if it's such a critical issue. So, for me, suppose if Assemblymember Quirk could get something to help our people here, great. But right now, okay. Anyway. Moving on.
Okay. We have additional late-breaking news regarding the state, the California Water Fix, which is no longer the California Water Fix, and some direction from the governor's office. And Thomas Nizer will be sharing some of the recent information that we received.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. On April 29th, the Governor Gavin Newsom signed Executive Order N-1019, ordering that the California Natural Resources Agency, Cal EPA, and the Department of Food and Agriculture prepare a resiliency portfolio that meets California's communities, economic, and environmental needs through the next century. Citing priorities that were outlined in the current California Water Action Plan, that order directs a number of activities to be pursued, but notably updating climate change impacts on water supply, to work toward the completion of the voluntary settlement agreements under the Bay Delta Water Quality Plan, and then most newsworthy, modernizing conveyance through the Delta, and pursue a new single tunnel project. As a result, today the Department of Water Resources Director Carla Namath issued a memorandum withdrawing the approval of the California Water Fix project and rescinded the accompanying environmental documents, which resulted in withdrawal of all DWR approvals related to that project. In addition, Ms. Namath also announced that DWR will develop a notice of preparation under CEQA to begin a new review process of a single tunnel Delta conveyance facility consistent with the governor's executive order and in close partnership with the state water contractors for funding the project. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of questions as they relate to ACWD. We've been pursuing, obviously, a business case on the tunnels for quite some time. A lot of information is not available yet. We will be pursuing this. Laura's up in Sacramento today. Actually, she's probably home by now. Late breaking news, not a lot of information to support it. Good news is DWR has stated that they feel a lot of the existing work that was done for the twin tunnels will be a sufficient basis for the start of the single tunnel, but we'll obviously be looking for cost and time implications for this to move forward. And we'll be updating the board as new information comes available.
Thank you. And I can tell you initial sort of reconnaissance information is that this will result in a net cost increase, ultimately, of some incremental value yet to be determined. So as Mr. Neiser explained, we'll continue monitoring it. We're plugged in many different forums in Sacramento, on the staff level, on the board level, and this will be an evolving situation, but basically the governor's mandate is single tunnel, probably smaller size, and the state water contractors and the individual contractors themselves are kind of falling in line with messages that we support this sort of new resilience methodology. And ACWD, we're also developing our own statements, and we'll be providing the board with that tomorrow, at least from the staff perspective, that you can at least use as a starting point. But at this point, it's this approach or nothing, so I think that's why everybody's just kind of falling in line with the governor's office directive. So thank you, Thomas, and that's pretty much everything that we have at this time on this subject.
And there'll be a lot of time to go into more details as it comes out, but one of the arguments for the twin tunnels was the ability to take advantage of heavy flows, so you'd be able to capture a lot more water in the system. So to the extent that we can interject that the pipeline connection at Los Vaqueros from the transfer station to Byron Bethany would be a way to help capture some of those flows, and other reservoirs which would have the ability to store water during heavy flows be revisited for reoperation. I would hope we could have the governor broaden their look at some of the potential opportunities that we've closed out up to now. And not lose some of them.
Sure. As we kind of come out of the fog of war, we will definitely be looking for all sorts of opportunities that might benefit ACWD, including the ones that you mentioned. I can also tell you that it's unlikely with the current concept that there'll be a lot of ag-type contractors involved in the tunnel project. So with that,
I have one comment. I really wish Governor Brown had been elected to a fifth term.
there was a lot of momentum, for sure, and this is kind of a reset, but, you know, we remain optimistic that we'll be able to get something done, because I think it was Winston Churchill once said, if you're not optimistic, what's the point?
I would support a letter saying, please do something.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, to go back to, this isn't going to be finished before I'm off the board. I won't be alive.
Yeah, add this up the aqueduct to the water fix. And you have
So regarding General Manager's reports, that's all I was planning on sharing on this particular evening. Thank you.
Okay. Director Weed, comments from your conference down?
I made my earlier comments relating to the PPIC, which your the panel session that you were referencing with Brownwater was also from a PPIC meeting earlier.
Yeah.
And so these occur periodically in the state of California, one in the north and one in the south. It's element constituency. Yeah.
Okay. One more thing from the General Manager. We want to confirm who will be at the budget workshop meeting.
May 15th.
May 15th.
Right now I'm scheduled to be on a flight, so I will probably not be there.
Okay.
But if that changes, I'll get back to you.
So we have I saw 3 hands go up. That's a pretty slim margin.
And I will only be there for part of the meeting.
Yeah, and the second part of the question is, for the 3 directors that are able to attend, can you attend at 3 p.m. instead of 4? Okay, so providing that everybody doesn't get stuck in traffic, we'll have a quorum. It's a relatively straightforward budget. You should all be very familiar with what's going on. It's simply a continuation of the strategic plan initiatives that are already underway, and other directives that the board has indicated in relatively routine, staff work. So we're continuing to hold the line on costs, I believe, and staffing levels. So for the directors that aren't able to attend, if you have any questions, let me know.
Okay.
But I'm hoping that the other carrot is, I think we can do this in one workshop, but we do have a placeholder later in the month of May that Director Huang may not be able to attend, that we were either going to use to continue the budget discussions and or talk about AMI-related issues. So it's also important that you keep that date, I think it's May 29th, open on your calendar at 4 p.m.
And one other, you had an email today, and since we have 5 board members here, actually have it in a meeting, which was an opening on the Region 5 board looking for nominees. It's part of a normal process. They have established a committee meeting. There, in all probability, will be at least one opening there because one of the members will be running for Vice President of Aqua, director from Zone 7. So I have an interest, but if there's other members who want to get that experience, I'll step back.
Well, all it takes is one director to have an interest. I'd be happy to put it on an agenda for board discussion.
Yeah, it has to be a formal nomination.
Correct, and it needs a resolution. So I'll be happy to put that on the appropriate board meeting agenda. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, now I'm really finished with GM.
Okay, well, I think we can get to, you don't have any further comments on your conference meeting there? Do we
Had
just
some
sort of hit the
fascinating
nutshell?
conversations, including with some of the new directors of DWR and the new chair. It's a remarkably different approach from the historic water professionals getting involved, and even environmental professionals getting involved in positions of leadership. These are truly people who come from a activist social background and have a different set of motives. And it's facts be damned.
Are you taking director comments right now or after closed door?
Well, I think we can take director comments at the moment.
Okay.
Sure.
I just have one item. I was at the Leaf Earth Day at the Niles Nursery on Saturday. Director Weed was there too. And it was extremely well attended. I was really happy to see all the elected officials from the Tri-City area there. Everybody made the rounds. It was just an awfully nice day. They set up picnic tables so families were able to bring their children and sit under shaded areas. And Bronco Billy's sold out of pizzas because people were bringing them over. The supermarket sold out of everything for sandwiches and other things. We had a fantastic booth, a lot of people stopping by, and I always learn a lot when I'm listening to our customers talking out there. So great job by our staff.
Thank you.
For the second time in 2 weeks.
I will make sure that they hear your compliments. It's, to be out there on a Saturday is, something that we don't take lightly for staff to give up a Saturday to do the good work of the district.
John and I had a great time. We went over to the Florence and had some beer afterward. So just to close out, one of the customers who dropped by was a board member of Irvington Presbyterian Church. I'd like to pass this along. He claimed that they have a well on their property for decades and that they've never been charged for their water, and were surprised to have a water bill suddenly sent to them. And he handles the finances for the church, and Megan tried to explain to him that they probably were receiving bills in the past, but they are planning on using a portion of their property, and they have quite a bit of land there, for growing a community garden. And of course, they serve the homeless 3 days a week there. So they're planning on using more water than they've been using in the past, and they're hoping to get a better understanding from the district.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the heads up.
That's it. We'll just move on to closed session. Although I did see the fish ladder the other day. I was out on the trail. Fish ladder looks lovely. There was water running through it. It was still running through it. So flow looked good. Fairly large. They looked like carp, probably in the creek. They were big fish. But nice job. Looks nice. And the rubber dam meetings were great, even though we probably have more dogs than people. Great job by staff.
Actually, I did have a comment. I just remembered. I happened to be working from home on Monday, and I was startled to get some pounding on my door from my neighbors, and they were concerned because our entire cul-de-sac had water flowing, and so I had to explain to them that we were cleaning out the main, and so it was a good opportunity for me to also kind of see us in action and explain to my neighbors what we were working on, and also to meet the employees who are working through them, and they were fantastic. They were very receptive to, very used to the neighbors coming alarmed, so it's helpful to have a director who lives next door to them. But I just wanted to pass my compliments along to the staff, because they did a great job, and they were in and out pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that, I think we can adjourn now to closed session.
Knock on the door. Aziz, why are you wasting
So
your time?
it is now 8:41, and the board is going to convene into closed session for item 8.1, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957, Public Employee Performance Evaluation, titled General Manager.
Okay. So the time is about 10:24 p.m. and in closed session pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957, Public Employee Performance Evaluation, titled General Manager, the board met with General Manager and provided input. We are now in open session again, and before the board is item 9.1, appoint agency designated representatives for labor negotiations between the district and the general manager, an unrepresented employee, for a possible amendment to the general manager's employment agreement. Historically,
President, Vice President.
the board has appointed the president and vice president to assume those roles, but the board has lots of flexibility on what you choose to do.
I'm willing to do it.
Yeah, same here. If the rest of the board director is fine with it, okay, then I think we have designated Director Gunther and I to be the
Labor negotiator.
labor negotiator.
Does that need a motion?
No,
We, to be safe,
we should?
we should do that.
Okay.
I move the president and vice president of the board be the representatives to represent the board in negotiations.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So measure passes unanimously, is what I heard. Okay, so, so now the time is about 10:25, and pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, a conference with labor negotiators and the agency designated representatives are President Gunther and Vice President Huang on the board, and the unrepresented employees general manager, and they will be meeting in closed session.
Okay, here we go, once again. Let me shut this
So-
thing.
Getting back to order at
That's news to me.
10:44. The closed session has ended. The board gave direction to their labor negotiators.
Let me do it officially. Thank you. I have to summon my district council. So thank you, President Gunther. Appreciate this. Pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, the agency designated representatives are Directors Gunther and Director Huang, and the unrepresented employee general manager, and in closed session, the board provided direction to its negotiators. And that concludes the closed session report for this evening.